Hello, and welcome back to Twisted Tales, the channel where we delve into the darkest corners of the human psyche. The story you are about to hear is one of a quiet street, a grand house, and a secret so horrific, it would shatter the illusion of their perfect lives forever. This is a story that will make you question how well you truly know the people you let into your home. Before we begin, if you enjoy stories that send a shiver down your spine, make sure to hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications. You won't want to miss what's coming. Now, settle in, and let us tell you the story of Evelyn and the beautiful maid who cooked her a meal she would never forget. Chapter 1. The grand Victorian house on a quiet, tree-lined street was the envy of the neighborhood. It belonged to Evelyn, a woman of impeccable taste and a fortune to match. Her gardens were always in bloom, her parties were the talk of the town, and her life, from the outside, appeared to be a masterpiece of curated perfection. But behind the polished oak doors, a different story was unfolding, one of quiet resentments and simmering tensions. The catalyst for this change was the arrival of a new maid, a young woman of striking beauty named Serafina. She was quiet, efficient, and had a way of moving through the house that was almost ghost-like. Evelyn had been pleased with her at first. Serafina was a hard worker, and her presence allowed Evelyn to dedicate more time to her social engagements. But as the weeks turned into months, a strange and unsettling dynamic began to form between the two women. Evelyn was a woman who thrived on control. Her late husband had left her with a vast inheritance, but it was her own shrewd investments that had doubled it. She was used to being in charge, to having her every whim catered to. Serafina, on the other hand, had a quiet strength that Evelyn found both intriguing and infuriating. She would follow Evelyn's instructions to the letter, but there was a look in her eyes, a subtle hint of defiance, that made Evelyn feel as though she was being silently judged. The house, once a symbol of Evelyn's success, began to feel like a cage. The silence between her and Serafina was thick with unspoken words, a constant, low-humming tension that seemed to seep into the very walls. Evelyn started to notice little things that were probably insignificant, but in the suffocating atmosphere of the house, they felt like acts of rebellion. A misplaced book, a flower arrangement that was slightly off-center, a dish that was not prepared to her exacting standards. Evelyn began to test Serafina, to push her, to see if she could break that quiet composure. She would leave passive-aggressive notes, make last-minute changes to the dinner menu, and find fault with even the most perfectly executed tasks. But Serafina never broke. She would simply nod, her beautiful face a mask of polite indifference, and correct the mistake without a word of complaint. This silent battle of wills escalated one evening when Evelyn was hosting one of her famous dinner parties. She had given Serafina a complicated recipe for a coq au vin, a dish that required hours of slow cooking and a delicate balance of flavors. Evelyn had made a point of telling her guests that her new maid was a treasure, a culinary genius, all the while knowing that she had set Serafina up for failure. She had accidentally forgotten to buy a key ingredient, a specific type of brandy that was essential for the sauce. As the guests arrived and the house filled with the sound of laughter and clinking glasses, Evelyn felt a smug sense of satisfaction. She imagined Serafina in the kitchen, flustered and panicking, her perfect composure finally cracking. But when the time came to serve the main course, Serafina emerged from the kitchen carrying a platter with the most beautiful coq au vin Evelyn had ever seen. The aroma was intoxicating, and as the guests took their first bite, a chorus of praise filled the dining room. Evelyn was stunned. She took a bite, and her fork clattered against her plate. The coq au vin was not just good. It was divine. The sauce was rich and complex, with a depth of flavor that she had never tasted before. She looked at Serafina, who was standing by the door, her face as impassive as ever. But this time, Evelyn saw something else in her eyes, a flicker of triumph, a silent checkmate that sent a chill down her spine. After the guests had left, Evelyn confronted Serafina in the kitchen. If Serafina could create such a masterpiece with a missing ingredient, what else was she capable of? What other secrets was she hiding behind that beautiful, enigmatic smile? The grand house, once her sanctuary, now felt like a battleground, and she had a sinking feeling that this was a war she was not going to win. Chapter 2: The dinner party was a turning point. The silent war between Evelyn and Serafina was no longer a one-sided affair. Serafina, it seemed, was no longer content to be a passive observer in Evelyn's games. She had shown her hand, and the house, once a stage for Evelyn's passive-aggressive theatrics, was now a chessboard where every move was calculated, every action a carefully planned countermove. Evelyn, for her part, was a woman unaccustomed to being challenged. Her life had been a series of victories, a testament to her sharp mind and ruthless ambition. The fact that a mere maid, a woman she had hired to scrub her floors and cook her meals, could so easily outsmart her was a bitter pill to swallow. The coco vin was a masterpiece, a culinary triumph that had won her the admiration of her guests, but to Evelyn, it tasted of defeat. She became obsessed with Serafina, with uncovering her secrets, with finding a chink in her armor. She would follow her around the house, her footsteps silent on the plush carpets, watching her as she went about her chores. But Serafina was a ghost, a phantom who moved through the house with an unnerving grace, leaving no trace of her presence, no clue to her past. Evelyn's obsession began to consume her. Her social life, once the center of her universe, now seemed a tedious distraction. Her friends, with their mindless chatter about fashion and gossip, bored her. The only thing that held her attention was the beautiful maid who was slowly, but surely, dismantling her carefully constructed world. One afternoon, driven by a desperate need to find something, anything, to use against Serafina, Evelyn broke a cardinal rule of her own making. She entered the maid's quarters. The room was small and sparsely furnished, a stark contrast to the opulence of the rest of the house. But it was clean, meticulously so, and there was a strange sense of peace in the small space that was absent in the rest of the house. Evelyn searched the room with a frantic energy, her hands rifling through drawers, her eyes scanning every surface. But there was nothing. No letters, no photographs, no personal belongings that could give her a glimpse into Serafina's life. It was as if the woman had no past, no history, no existence outside the walls of the grand house. And then, just as she was about to give up, she saw it. Tucked away beneath the mattress, a small, leather-bound book. Her heart pounded in her chest as she opened it. It was a diary, and the elegant script that filled its pages was unmistakably Serafina's. Evelyn's hands trembled as she read. The diary was not filled with the ramblings of a lovesick girl or the mundane details of a servant's life. It was a collection of recipes, hundreds of them, each one more strange and exotic than the last. But it was not the recipes themselves that sent a shiver of fear down Evelyn's spine. It was the ingredients. They were written in a language she did not recognize, a strange, archaic script that looked like something out of a medieval grimoire. And next to each ingredient there was a small, detailed drawing. A lock of hair, a vial of blood, a human tooth. Evelyn's blood ran cold. This was not a cookbook. It was a book of spells, a grimoire of dark magic. And Serafina, the beautiful, quiet maid, was not a culinary genius. She was a witch. The realization hit Evelyn with the force of a physical blow. Suddenly, everything made sense. The strange, unsettling atmosphere of the house, Serafina's uncanny ability to anticipate her every move, the almost magical quality of the food she cooked. It was not a game of wits. It was a battle of a different kind, a struggle for power that was being fought on a plane she did not understand. Evelyn slammed the diary shut, her mind reeling. She had to get Serafina out of her house, out of her life. But how? She couldn't go to the police. They would think she was mad. And she couldn't confront Serafina, who knew what she was capable of. That night, Evelyn did not sleep. She sat in the darkness of her bedroom, the diary clutched in her hands, her mind racing. She was trapped, a prisoner in her own home, at the mercy of a woman who was slowly, but surely poisoning her life. The next morning, she came downstairs to find Serafina in the kitchen, humming a strange, melodic tune as she prepared breakfast. She looked up as Evelyn entered, and her beautiful face broke into a smile. It was the same smile she had given her after the dinner party, a smile that was both beautiful and terrifying. "Good morning, madam," she said, her voice as sweet as honey. "I'm making your favorite, omelette with a special ingredient." Evelyn looked at the omelette, and her stomach churned. It was a perfectly cooked omelette, light and fluffy, with a sprinkling of fresh herbs. But she could not shake the image of the diary, of the strange, unsettling ingredients. She forced a smile. "I'm not hungry," she said, her voice barely a whisper. Serafina's smile did not falter. "Oh, but you must eat, madam," she said, her voice taking on a strange, hypnotic quality. "You need to keep your strength up." She placed the plate on the table in front of Evelyn, and the aroma, a strange, exotic scent that was both alluring and repulsive, filled the air. Evelyn looked at the omelette, and then at Serafina, at the dark, knowing look in her eyes. And she knew, with a certainty that chilled her to the bone, that this was not just a meal. It was a challenge, a test. And she had a feeling that, if she failed, the consequences would be far more terrifying than she could ever imagine. Chapter 3. The omelette sat on the plate, a seemingly innocent breakfast, but to Evelyn, it was a symbol of her imprisonment. The aroma, once alluring, now seemed to carry a sinister undertone, a hint of something dark and forbidden. She looked at Serafina, who stood by the counter, her beautiful face a mask of serene confidence. The silence in the kitchen was a living thing, a palpable entity that seemed to press in on Evelyn from all sides. Days turned into a week, and the house, once a source of pride, became a gilded cage. Evelyn was a prisoner in her own home, a puppet in a macabre play orchestrated by her beautiful, enigmatic maid. She stopped eating the food Serafina prepared, surviving on pre-packaged snacks she had hidden in her bedroom. But the hunger was not just for food. It was a hunger for control, a desperate craving for the life that had been stolen from her. The breaking point came on a stormy Tuesday night. The wind howled outside, rattling the windows of the grand house. A perfect symphony for the tempest that was raging inside Evelyn's soul. She had been a fighter all her life, a woman who had clawed her way to the top. She would not be defeated by a maid, witch or no witch. She marched down to the kitchen, her heart pounding a frantic rhythm against her ribs. Serafina was there, as she always was, preparing a late-night snack for herself. She looked up as Evelyn entered, a flicker of surprise in her dark eyes. "Madam," she said, her voice as calm as a still lake, "I did not expect to see you." "I want you out of my house," Evelyn said, her voice trembling with a mixture of fear and rage. "Now." Serafina's smile was a slow, deliberate thing, a work of art that was both beautiful and terrifying. "But I am happy here, madam," she said, her voice as soft as a lover's whisper. "And you need me. Who will cook for you? Who will take care of this big, beautiful house?" "I will find someone else," Evelyn said, her voice gaining strength. "You are fired. Pack your things and leave." Serafina's smile widened, but it did not reach her eyes. "I don't think so," she said, her voice losing its gentle lilt, replaced by a cold, hard edge that sent a shiver down Evelyn's spine. "You see, madam, this house is mine now. You are just a guest." The words hung in the air, a declaration of war that was as shocking as it was terrifying. Evelyn stared at her, her mind struggling to comprehend the audacity of the statement. But there was no doubt in Serafina's eyes, no hint of a bluff. She meant every word. And in that moment, something inside Evelyn snapped. The fear, the anger, the frustration, all the emotions she had been suppressing for weeks, erupted in a volcanic explosion of rage. She lunged at Serafina, her hands outstretched, her nails like claws. The fight was a primal, brutal thing, a whirlwind of flailing limbs and guttural screams. They crashed against the kitchen counter, sending pots and pans clattering to the floor. Evelyn was stronger than she looked, her rage giving her a strength she did not know she possessed. But Serafina was a different kind of strong. She was a coiled spring, a predator who had been waiting for the right moment to strike. She moved with a fluid grace, her body a blur of motion. She dodged Evelyn's clumsy attacks, her hands moving with a surgeon's precision. A sharp, searing pain shot up Evelyn's arm, and she looked down to see a small, silver knife, a paring knife, embedded in her flesh. The sight of her own blood was like a splash of cold water. The rage that had been fueling her drained away, replaced by a cold, numbing fear. She looked at Serafina, at the dark, triumphant look in her eyes, and she knew that she had made a terrible mistake. She had underestimated her opponent, and now she was going to pay the price. The police were called to the house a week later. The neighbors had complained of a strange smell, a sweet, cloying odor that seemed to seep from the very walls of the grand house. The beautiful maid, Serafina, had greeted them at the door, her face a mask of concern. She told them that her madam had gone away on a sudden trip, that she had not heard from her in days. But the police were not convinced. They had seen too much in their years on the force to be fooled by a pretty face and a well-rehearsed story. They searched the house, and in the kitchen they found the source of the smell. A large pot sat on the stove, a thick, bubbling stew simmering inside. One of the officers, a young, idealistic man who still believed in the inherent goodness of people, lifted the lid. The sight that greeted him would haunt his nightmares for the rest of his life. The stew was a grotesque, unrecognizable concoction of meat and bones, a horrific testament to the dark, twisted depths of the human soul. The case of the beautiful maid who cooked her madam into a dog-meat dish became a local legend, a cautionary tale whispered in hushed tones at dinner parties and social gatherings. The grand house on the quiet, tree-lined street was sold, but no one ever stayed for long. They said it was haunted, that you could still hear the faint, melodic humming of a beautiful maid, and the terrified screams of a woman who had played a game she could never win. The story served as a chilling reminder that sometimes the most beautiful faces hide the darkest secrets, and the most perfect lives are just a facade, a carefully constructed illusion that can be shattered by a single horrific act of violence. The initial police investigation was a study in methodical frustration. The grand Victorian house, once a symbol of Evelyn's impeccable taste, had been transformed into a sterile crime scene. Detective Miller, a man whose weary eyes had seen the worst of humanity, led the forensics team through the silent, opulent rooms. He found the house unervingly clean. There were no signs of a struggle, no overturned furniture, no bloodstains that weren't already contained within the gruesome pot on the stove. It was as if the house itself was holding its breath, complicit in the secret it harbored. Serafina was the star witness, the grieving, terrified maid. She played her part to perfection. She sat in the lavish living room, a delicate porcelain doll in a sea of blue uniforms, dabbing at her dry eyes with a silk handkerchief. She recounted her story with a quiet, trembling voice. Madame had been acting strangely for weeks, she told them. Paranoid, secretive. Then one day she was simply gone. She'd packed a bag and left without a word. I was so worried, Serafina whispered, her gaze fixed on a point just past Miller's shoulder. She wasn't herself. I thought perhaps she'd gone to visit a friend, to clear her head. And the stew? Miller asked, his voice flat, betraying none of his thoughts. You told the responding officers you were preparing it for the dogs at the local shelter. A recipe you were trying out. Yes, she said, nodding eagerly. Madame was a great philanthropist. She loved animals. I wanted to do something in her honor, to feel useful while I waited for her to return. It was a plausible story, almost too plausible. Miller had seen killers before. He had seen their panic, their guilt, their clumsy attempts to cover their tracks. He saw none of that in Serafina. He saw a chilling calm, a composure so absolute it was unnatural. It was the stillness that pricked at his professional intuition, a silent alarm bell ringing in the back of his mind. The preliminary forensic report on the contents of the pot was a nightmare. The cooking process had been long and thorough, breaking down tissues and destroying much of the cellular structure. The medical examiner could confirm the remains were organic, likely mammalian, but a conclusive identification as human was proving difficult without DNA. They found traces of sophisticated herbs and spices, some of which were so rare the lab had to send them for specialized analysis. It was, from a purely culinary standpoint, a complex and masterfully prepared dish. The thought made Miller's stomach turn. He decided to dig into Evelyn's life, hoping to find a loose thread, anything that might unravel Serafina's perfect story. He interviewed Evelyn's friends, a circle of wealthy socialites who spoke of her with a mixture of admiration and fear. They described her as a brilliant but ruthless woman, controlling, demanding, prone to fits of temper. Several of them mentioned the new maid. Evelyn was obsessed with her. One woman confided over tea, her diamonds glittering nervously. At first, she couldn't stop praising her. Then, the tone changed. She became suspicious, almost frightened of the girl. The last time we spoke, she said something odd. She said, "That girl could turn poison into a feast for kings." I thought she was being dramatic, as usual. Poison into a feast for kings. The phrase stuck in Miller's mind. He obtained a warrant to search Serafina's room again, this time with a fine-toothed comb. It was as Spartan and immaculate as before. No diaries, no letters, no photos. It was the room of a ghost. But as his team was about to leave, a young officer ran his gloved hand under the old, cast-iron radiator. His fingers brushed against something taped to the underside. It was a small, tarnished silver locket. Miller opened it. Inside were two tiny, faded photographs. On one side was a younger, smiling Serafina. On the other was a man and a woman, standing proudly in front of a small, charming restaurant. The sign above the door read, "The Willow Creek Bistro." It was the first crack in Serafina's armor, the first hint of a past she had so carefully erased. Miller assigned a junior detective to dig into the Willow Creek Bistro. He had a feeling that whatever had happened in Evelyn's kitchen had not started there. Its roots lay somewhere else, buried in the past, in a life Serafina had tried to pretend never existed. Later that day, the forensics lab called with a breakthrough. They had managed to isolate a small, metallic fragment from the sludge at the bottom of the pot. It had been protected from the worst of the heat by a larger piece of bone. After cleaning, they identified it as a custom-made titanium pin, the kind used in orthopedic surgery to mend a complex fracture. A quick check of Evelyn's medical records confirmed it. 10 years ago, she had shattered her right femur in a riding accident. The pin was hers. Miller looked at the evidence bag containing the small piece of metal. It was all he needed. He now had a victim. He had a murder weapon, the entire kitchen. And he had a suspect, a beautiful, quiet maid whose composure he was about to shatter. The game, he thought, was over. The interrogation room was cold and gray, a stark contrast to the warmth and color of Evelyn's home. Serafina sat at the metal table, her hands folded neatly in her lap. She looked smaller here, less imposing without the grand house as her stage. But her eyes, when she looked up at Detective Miller, held the same unnerving calm. "We've identified the remains found in your cooking pot, Serafina," Miller began, placing a file on the table between them. He opened it to a picture of the titanium pin. This was surgically implanted in Evelyn's right femur 10 years ago. It's a perfect match. Serafina glanced at the photo, her expression unreadable. For a long moment, she said nothing. The silence stretched, thick and heavy. Miller waited. He knew this was the critical moment, the point where the suspect's carefully constructed world either shatters or solidifies into defiant denial. When Serafina finally spoke, her voice was not the soft, timid whisper of the grieving maid. It was low and clear, resonating with an icy resolve that made the hair on Miller's arms stand up. "It took you long enough," she said. The confession, when it came, was not a torrent of guilt or a plea for understanding. It was a story, told with the chilling precision of a historian recounting a significant event. It was a story of revenge, decades in the making. "The Willow Creek Bistro," she began, her eyes distant, "was my parents' life. It was their dream. They poured everything they had into their money, their passion, their love. It was a beautiful place. The food was honest. People were happy there." Miller listened, his pen hovering over his notepad. Forgotten. The pieces started to click into place. The junior detective's report had outlined the bistro's fate. A small, family-owned business driven into bankruptcy by a hostile real estate acquisition. The developer who had bought the property for pennies on the dollar, only to flip it a year later for a massive profit, was a shrewd investor named Evelyn. She destroyed them, Serafina continued, her voice devoid of emotion. She used lawyers and loopholes to bleed them dry. My father, he couldn't bear the shame. He took his own life a month after we lost the restaurant. My mother died of what the doctors called a broken heart a year later. I was 16. She paused, looking directly at Miller. Evelyn didn't just take their business. She took their names. She erased them. In her world, they were just a footnote in a successful financial transaction. In my world, they were everything. Her life after that was one of singular purpose. She put herself through culinary school, not out of passion, but to master a craft. She learned about anatomy, about butchery, about the chemical properties of herbs that could mask scents and break down tissue. The old family recipe book, the one Evelyn had mistaken for a grimoire, was her textbook. It wasn't about magic. It was about tradition, a lineage of cooks and butchers who understood meat in an intimate way. Getting the job in Evelyn's house was the easy part. The years of quiet planning had paid off. The game Evelyn thought she was playing with me, Serafina said with a faint, cold smile, was an amusing distraction. She thought she was testing my patience. In reality, she was simply seasoning herself for the main course. She recounted the night of the murder with terrifying clarity. There was no rage-fueled struggle. It was a quiet, efficient execution. A sedative, derived from a rare flower root and steeped in Evelyn's evening tea, was all it took. Evelyn had simply fallen asleep in her chair and never woken up. The rest was just butchery. Hard work, she called it, but necessary. Cooking her was the final, most important step, she explained, her voice dropping to an almost reverential tone. Evelyn spent her life consuming others, their businesses, their dreams, their very lives. She was a predator. It was only fitting that, in the end, she should be consumed, turned into a nameless dish, erased, just as she erased my parents. The confession was complete. There was no remorse, no plea for mercy. In Serafina's mind, justice had been served. A perfect, poetic circle had been closed. As the officers led her away in handcuffs, she passed Detective Miller. She paused and looked at him, her beautiful face serene. "Tell me, detective," she said, her voice a soft murmur. "Have you ever tasted a dish so perfect it felt like a prayer?" Miller didn't answer. He could only watch as the beautiful, deadly Maid was led out into the harsh light of day. The case was closed, but for him it would never truly be over. He would forever be haunted by the story of the Willow Creek Bistro, and by the chilling memory of a woman who had turned her horrific revenge into a culinary masterpiece. A final, terrible prayer for the dead.